Welcome. This is Panda Consulting's ArcGIS workshop. I'm Frank Conkling, and this workshop we're going to look at migrating to Parcel Fabric. Where do I start? And we're going to start talking about some of the things you want to think about, some of the things you want to start doing before you even consider going and moving to the Parcel Fabric. Before we start, a couple things. Those of you who are here live, we have a chat window, and if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and enter them in the chat window. Chris with Panda is actually moderating that chat window, so he'll make sure that I pay attention to it and answer any questions or any comments that you have. Also, if you look down in the lower right corner, you will see that, in fact, we have a QR code. That QR code will take you to Panda Consulting website, tell you who we are, what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and such. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we have to think about is we have to think about developing a strategy, because the one thing that migrating into the parcel fabric is not, it is not merely taking your data and changing the structure or adding a couple things to it. No, this is actually an opportunity, and you should take advantage of this opportunity if you're thinking about moving into parcel fabric, of looking at the way you handle your parcel data. Are you continuing to go and carry on old um, old techniques, old processes that you had developed 10, 15, 20 years ago? Or are you still maintaining them? How are you handling the publication of the data? Are you handling it and publishing it as a printed map or as a website, as a web map? How are you doing that? It's a chance to go and look. How are you sharing your data with others? You really want to go and look at least these four steps here and make sure that you have a good plan in place. So we're going to look at these four different items. First is developing a strategy, then looking at the specific data and data preparation and extraction, talk about leveraging some of the ArcGIS Pro tools and how much better they are with Pro. Please don't consider making any changes inside of ArcMap, but just get into ArcGIS Pro as much as possible, and then start looking at post-migration strategies. So here we go. Develop a strategy. And I'm going to put this at the very top. And Esri has made the migration of data as simple as they think they can make it. But the problem is, as I said, it is not merely a translation of data. This is really the opportunity to go and evaluate an overall strategy. What am I doing now, and how can I make it better? Because that's really what you want to do. You don't just want to go and follow their technology lead. You want to go and think about, what are your problem areas now, and how can you make them better? And unless you've done this already, you're not going to know what the options are. So first and foremost, I'm going to tell you, go out and contact a qualified consultant. Personally, my ego says that Panda is one of the best out there. You should look into contacting Panda about this, but there are others who have the parcel management specialty designation, and they've been tested by ESRI, but at least reach out to a consultant. Don't do this on your own. Um, the next is really internally, you can do this. You can identify the required resources. What do you have for your existing hardware? Make sure you know what it is. And and once you talk to somebody, you'll be able to evaluate, is that up to the job of the parcel fabric? And how are you going to how are you going to go and deploy it? What about software? Have you upgraded to ArcGIS Pro? What version? If you are on an enterprise, what version of the enterprise are you? You want to get as close to the latest versions as possible. There's some exceptions, and again, if you contact a qualified consultant, they'll be able to go and guide you on that, tell you have to pair certain things together, that sort of thing. And then finally, and this is an important part of this, what personnel do you have? Do you have people that are willing and want to learn how to do things better than what they're doing right now? You want to go and evaluate your personnel. Then the next point, and this is really the filter point, which breaks down everything. How are you going to deploy? With the parcel fabric, there's actually two different ways that you can deploy. If you only have one editor on here, a single editor, it's a small organization, you can not just develop, but you can also deploy in a file geodatabase, one editor at a time. They can then go and publish it out either to ArcGIS Online, or they can publish it out to Enterprise, SDE, that you're sharing it out that way. But you want to do the editing in the file geodatabase if you have only one editor. If, however, you have more than one editor at the same time, you want to go and look at, or not just want to go, you're actually required to go to an enterprise deployment, meaning you put in place ArcGIS Enterprise, you have a portal running, you have a data store set up. It's a more complex deployment, but enough of us have done this that it's actually not that tough. And you just need to make sure that you have everything in place. The next component is, when you're developing the strategy, is trying to figure out, when am I going to do this? What is your timeline for this? The good news is there's not as much upfront data cleanup that's required as there has been in the past. The ArcMap parcel fabric was notorious in that you had to have your data in a certain structure and had to be specifically cleaned up before you put it in, because it was so tough to clean up once you got it in place. However, with the ArcGIS parcel fabric, that mostly goes away. You're going to use ArcGIS Pro tools to clean up your data eventually, and it doesn't have to be cleaned up in the beginning. But you do want to establish a timeline, because you're going to wind up testing this a couple of times. Even a consultant, for example, when we come in and do a migration, we do several prototypes. We first bring it into a standard parcel fabric and let you see what the data looks like, see what assumptions we make, whether or not we've missed anything, and then work through that to see, is this going to work, or do we want to do it a different way? So you want to establish a timeline. When can you start prototyping, and when can you do final deployments on there? And you want to sort of figure out and outline the steps as far as what you're going to need, when you're going to need. And then you begin identifying system dependencies. All right. When I say system dependencies, what do I mean by that? Parcel fabric or parcel data does not stand on its own. It is one of the most used data sets in GIS. Almost everybody relies upon this as a base layer, one that's foundational, and it is important to everyone. So the question is, who else is using your data, and how are they getting it? And how are you sharing it? And you want to make sure that you understand all of those interdependencies between what you're doing to maintain your data and what the rest of your organization and the general public does to go and consume the data that you've maintained. How does that happen now? We know of several organizations where there might be 3 or 4 interdependencies, and you want to make sure that you understand that before you start thinking about the strategy on moving into the parcel fabric. It is all interconnected now, and we want to make sure that you don't go putting something in place that breaks something else down the line. You want to go and recognize that there's interdependencies within here. And again, this is not just unique to the parcel fabric. This is something that you want to do for any technology deployment, and look at the same sort of things. What are your resources? What do you have available? What are the limitations on those? What do you have to put in place before you move into the parcel fabric? What about timelines for your project? Are they realistic timelines? You want to understand the steps that are needed, and you want to look at system dependencies and interdependencies between them. Again, this is not just a parcel fabric. This is for any technology deployment out there. So here's where we start getting into things like, what about your data? Because this is where most people focus so much of their effort on, is that what do we have on our data and what do we have to do to get it in there? And I can tell you, we've seen at least 4 different types of data models that people use to go and store their current data in. Everything from a CAD data model in which things are represented as drawn lines and then pieces of text inside of a CAD system. And then how do you go and migrate that in place? And that really is the lowest level. It means you have to take the lines, bring them in. You have to take the pieces of text, make sure they're in the correct position, geographic position within those lines, build polygons on it, analyze it, make sure it's got everything in there, you haven't lost anything. And that's just the beginning of it from a GIS standpoint. Again, with CAD models, you have to go first from CAD into GIS and then take the GIS and bring it in. Second type of data model that we have, and we see this often, is this what we call the cartographic data line or cartographic line based model. This is one in which we look at the client and see where they're at and determine what are they doing right now. And by the way, the cartographic line model tends to be focused on printing maps because they use the lines to go and denote where a boundary is rather than having polygons on here. And as an example, I have over here, this is a cartographic line data model. And what happens is they have a series of lines in here. You have multiple annotation layers, things like tax parcel annotation, parcel number annotation, and then all of these other types of annotations, because the information is stored not on the features. The information is stored on these pieces of text. Anybody that knows me knows that I hate annotation. We should be moving now. We are far enough in GIS that we should be moving to putting information on the features that it's supposed to represent. All right. I'll leave this soapbox. I'll get off of it now and go back. But this is a cartographic line data model. Then they also have a series of cartographic lines in which we have different line types, unknown lines, historic lines, leader lines, easement lines, and again, they represent the boundaries of things by these lines rather than polygons actually mapping the areas. And often we'll have, in this case, we actually had 2 different sets of lines. One is a cartographic line, another is a boundary line. Again, whether it's a parcel or right of way or a subdivision or anything like this. Again, this model was good for producing a map, but it's not great inside of GIS. We have to transition out of this, which means you have to go and create polygons. You have to make sure that your lines match those polygons in here. You want to think about how these things are stored together. In this case, they do have subdivision polygons and they have parcel polygons, but these parcel polygons basically are subtyped as far as what type of a parcel polygon that's built out on it. We also have the same sort of thing here with right-of-way polygons. And then they have some lot polygons and some condo polygons and some archival or historic polygons in here. And this is sort of typical of a cartographic line data model. There's nothing wrong with it, but if you move into the parcel fabric, you'll find that you'll see a lot of efficiencies in here. You're not producing annotation, you're not producing extra lines on here just to go and produce a map. You'll use other elements in here. I'm going to move back here. So next type of model we have, and I don't have an example of it here, but I do have others I can call up, is the Polygon-Based topology model. And The topology model basically looks at the relationships of the polygons, and sometimes they'll have lines denoting what the actual boundaries are and where the information came from and what the actual course information and description is on there. But that's not always the case. You want to go again, examine your overall existing data structure and think about, what do I want to get to? And I'm going to describe eventually what the ArcMap parcel fabric structure looks like to help you with this. So you want to get to, again, completely understand your existing data model. Your ArcMap parcel fabric, if we go and look at that, this is the cartographic line data model. This is the ArcMap parcel fabric. Those of you that have been in it, and we're finding that a majority of the ArcMap parcel fabric users have basically converted. They spent enough time early on to go and migrate it from their previous data models into the ArcMap parcel fabric, and it was a good data model. It was overly complex, but it was all right. And we're going to talk about the issues associated with coming from here. One of the things we want to talk about. One of the things we're going to cover. All right. And then once you really get to know what your data looks like and how currently you are representing the areas, the different types of areas that you're mapping, what the boundaries are, what information is stored and available for those boundaries on there, then you can begin looking at data integrity issues. All right. Data integrity issues really deal with how good is your current data? Do you have lines for all of the polygons that are built? Do those polygons overlap or have gaps between them? Do they have densified curves on them? These are the things you want to know about your data. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to convert it all, but you want to know the quality of your data before you even consider moving it into the parcel fabric. And then once you've identified that, and again, we've got another slide where we talk about some of those issues. You've got, what are your current workflows? How do you actually right now edit your parcels? And I'm surprised when I go into clients' offices, sometimes they really don't know what their standard operating procedures are. It really depends upon what day somebody comes in and does the work on there. Check to see whether you have standard operating procedures, or if you have standards of what they need to do, and check and not just the geometry of your GIS data, but the attribution. What attributes do you have? Where do they come from? How do you check to make sure that they are correct and no garbage or bad information gets introduced into your parcel fabric? Because you're going to want to know this as you're moving forward. You're going to want to go and try to fix that as much as possible. All right, so the data preparation is really about learning about your data, making sure that you have a really deep understanding of what you're doing in here. I do want to go and introduce this one comment, because I have been reaching out recently to smaller clients and ones that don't have big organizations behind them. And often when I ask them to go and send me data, what they'll do is they'll send me shape files. And those of you that have been in my workshops know that I have a saying, because shape files have no way of actually accurately drawing a curve as it relates to parcels. A shapefile is one of the worst things that you can store your data in, because when it draws a curve, instead of drawing it as a straight line, or excuse me, as a true geometric curve, instead, what happens is it will go and draw an approximation by drawing a series of short straight lines that approximate a curve, but it's not a true curve in there at all. And that will cause you problems down the road. It will cause you to begin to see issues with things like topology, and that the topology and that straight line approximation between contiguous curves are never the same. And you'll see issues with them. So my saying is always only give shapefiles to people that you don't like, because the data quality on them, the integrity as far as the geometry, the limitations on the shapefiles are so great that you really don't give it to somebody again if you want them to have good quality data on there. All right. Remember, only give shapefiles to people you don't like. So the next thing we want to look at here is, after we went to the preparation, how about leveraging your ArcGIS Pro tools and looking at your data structure and what do we have to do with it? Let's go and look at some of this other data. Let's look at this cartographic line data model here. Some of the things that we have in here that can cause problems. Well, the first thing that we have is, this is a big one for almost everybody, is the annotation. Annotation is not stored in the parcel fabric. Annotation is external to the parcel fabric. It can be related, but it's not stored in the parcel fabric. So let's start with that. It is not key to it. So if you wish to continue with annotation, there's some minimum things you want to go and deal with. One, ArcMap annotation structure is different from ArcGIS Pro annotation structure. And when I have annotation in here, and I'm going to look to my list from editing, you'll see that on here it says that annotation must be upgraded to be editable in Pro. So that's the first thing, is that before anything else, if you wish to go and edit annotation inside of ArcGIS Pro, whether it's the parcel fabric or not, you're going to have to upgrade it. And what it actually does is it inserts some additional attribute fields inside the annotation feature classes. Be aware that when you do that upgrade on the annotation, it does not copy it automatically. It actually upgrades the data set that you give it. So it's highly recommended that if you go to upgrade your annotation to work with it in Pro, you keep a copy of it or make sure that you have a backup, because once you move and upgrade it into Pro so you can edit it, you can never use it in ArcMap again. So this is one of those where you have a compatibility issue. Once you upgrade, you're not going back. So that's the first thing. Annotation has to be upgraded, and it's a different structure. The second thing is feature-linked annotation. Feature-linked annotation in ArcMap was often almost exclusively related to the object IDs of the feature that it was linked to and the annotation feature. In ArcGIS Pro, that's gone. Feature-linked annotation is now globally indexed, which means there's a global ID in both the annotation and in the features, and that you have to go and revise all the feature classes to make sure that it's working correctly on there. Again, if you have a good consultant, they know how to do this, and they'll help you with it. They'll help you work through the issues here. Third issue with annotation is that it does work in Pro. It does work off of an enterprise SDE connection, and annotation in a web service using REST services is a little bit chatty and often comes off as being very, very sluggish. And we've had multiple clients complain about it if you have a lot of annotation and they've looked for alternatives. We're not going to go over all of those, but just to say that if you get somebody who knows what they're doing, they'll help you with those alternatives on there It's well worth your investment. This is all part of that evaluation. What are you storing right now? How do you store it? Where does this information come from? Again, I'll jump up on that soapbox one more time, one final time in this workshop. It's time to leave annotation behind. There are many changes inside of labeling engines, the procedures we use, the scaling of labels. It's well past time. Let's get rid of annotation. All right. So that's the first thing we want to deal with is annotation. How are we going to go and do it? You have to upgrade it to an ArcGIS Pro structure, but then you've got other things to consider, including things like feature length annotation. How do you reset those relationship classes for there? And then finally, maybe you want to consider alternatives. Look and explore those alternatives. Everything from converting annotation to points, using label points, to maybe capturing the annotation and moving it into the features that they are supposed to represent, and creating new label expressions doing that. Second thing, COGO. Inside of the ArcGIS Pro, COGO is no longer text on here. And let's see if we can find something here. If we open up the field definition of these lines, we can see here that these COGO lines, these COGO values that are stored here, are in fact text strings inside of ArcGIS Pro. Now let's go and close this out and go over to this one here and look at inside of Pro. The COGO values are no longer text strings. They're actually number fields. These are double word number fields, meaning 2 8-bit bytes to store the numbers. They are true numbers in here that you can format however you want on here. As far as the number of decimal places and such. You want to make sure that you migrate your data, your COGO values, over to your to the new ArcGIS Pro COGO. Well, how do you do that? Well, there's actually Jason with the ESRI Parcel Fabric development team has done a great job with this. ArcMap logo. All right. Should have been a little bit smarter there. Migrate here. There is documentation here. There actually is a script that you can download to go and run for this. Jason's done a great job on this. Just sit here. It's out on the community site. Sorry, I don't have that up here. But it's a script that you can run, and it will take your ArcMap COGO fields, write them out to a new ArcGIS Pro compliant COGO enabled line feature class, and it will automatically migrate them. It will also tell you whether or not you've got errors in here, some things that are stored in those text fields that don't move over, but it does a really good job, and you've got to give got to give Jason some applause and attaboys for that. He did a great job on that. And that's COGO attribution. All right. You have to do these first two things if you've got COGO and you've got annotation on there. Another one you want to consider is subtypes. A lot of us have been using subtypes. You can see it here. These there's polygons here. These are all subtyped. These are subtyped. So if we look at this and we look to data design and look at the subtypes on this layer, it actually says that there is, in fact, a polycode is our subtype. But a lot of times, what we were doing is we were using subtypes for symbology. Rather than just setting the attribution on there, we would go and put specific subtypes on there. Because when you brought the subtypes in, it would automatically identify that they were symbolized differently. But subtypes are never really intended to be used that way. Subtypes actually were supposed to be used to go and provide contingent values on there so that if you've got one certain type of subtypes, you can have different coded to value domains against other attribute fields in there. Subtypes are also used against topology, whether or not you had good topology in there and whether or not you were running certain topology against certain classes. So unless you were using it for topology, and we're not going to go into topology right now, but topology in the parcel fabric is very different from topology as we used to use it. As I like to say, it's not your father's topology anymore. There are new things that the parcel fabric introduces that allows us to go and be much more efficient in what we're doing. But for the most part, you want to go and consider whether or not you really need to continue to subtype these individual features, or whether it's better handled with an attribute, specific attribute on there. And if that's the case, you need to unsubtype them. You want to go and delete those subtypes, make sure they're coded correctly, move them into attribute fields, into coded value attribute fields on there. Subtypes. Again, that deals with both lines and with polygons. Now, it's not to say you can't put a subtype inside the parcel fabric, but just be aware that if you do that, the interface is a little strange. For every single subtype, you get current and historic, current lines, historic lines, current polygons, historic polygons. So you really want to think hard about your data structure and whether or not you want to continue maintaining that, or whether you want to go and look at more efficient ways of handling it from that point forward. Subtypes, again, you want to find somebody who knows what they're doing. Condominiums. A lot of us in more urbanized or suburbanized areas have condominiums. And how do we handle the condominiums? Often with older parcel types, whether it's the parcel fabric in here, there might be a tax to condo related table on here. A lot of times, if you've got that, you got to figure out, well, how are we going to go and identify and use this? Often, you want to recognize that maybe you can start having stacked polygons or starting to represent these condominiums more accurately than what you've been doing previously. At that opportunity, when you're getting ready to think about moving into the parcel fabric, now is when you want to think hard about how are you managing this data. Don't just automatically migrate it over into a halfway structure and consider that efficient. It's not. Now's a chance for you to go and get new efficiencies. So if you did, in fact, spend the time to move your data into the ArcMap parcel fabric, that doesn't mean you avoid issues. There's still issues. One is this dreaded default plan. Within the ArcMap parcel fabric, everything was related to a plan table. This was a regular table. It did not have any geometry on it. But the use of the plan table was optional. And what happened was, as you can see from this client, most times the plans, because it seemed logical when a new subdivision of land came in and they were maintaining subdivisions and lots and such, they would create a plan for that. But the normal type of daily transactions for parcels, they wouldn't create plans. So they would leave it as the default map plan. Well, what happens is that as you go in here, let's go back to this one here, and I'm going to pull in the actual parcel layer here. This parcel has got every single polygon in here, 132,000, and I'm going to ask it to tell me how many polygons are in here that have the default plan. How many have we got? 45,713. That becomes a problem if you use the script, and that the script that Esri provides as part of the migration script takes your plan table, and for every entry in the plan table, it creates a record. And then everything that's related to that record gets associated with it, and it's one big polygon that's created. Now, within GIS, you have not just a polygon, but you have spatial indexing going on. How does it get displayed? How do you go and search things? Those sorts of things. And early on with these migrations, we recognize that putting 45,000 polygons into a single polygon, which is the record polygon, was problematic, and it would slow you down. As we solve this by modifying that migration plan, where after you get to about 2,000, it doesn't build it anymore, which isn't really the correct solution. You want to go and think about it's separating, what type of polygon this is, what about the layers, and create new plan entries for those. Again, if you've got somebody who knows what they're doing, they can do that for you. It should be done before you migrate it in, and will give you a much more efficient parcel fabric structure when you move in there. Also, many of the tricks that we were doing back with the ArcMap parcel fabric was going and extending out the local government information model. The LGIM was a really good starting model, and it included everything from the public land survey system to subdivisions and lots and roads, and gave us places to put all of this stuff, easements and such, but it didn't give us everything. And if you weren't located in a public land survey system state, you had a whole series of parcel types that were not applicable to you. So it was a very specific data model. And what people would do is they would make extensions out. They would extend new parcel types, and they would have parcel type 51 and 52. The original LGIM only went from 1 to 12 was the latest one. So you got to deal with how are you going to handle the extensions to LGIM. Now, again, I got to give a great shout out. The Esri Parcel Fabric team has done a great job with that script. It really is good, and it identifies whether you've got types out there that you didn't have in the LGIM, whether you've got nothing in that LGIM. It does a really good job, but you want to make sure that you precondition your ArcMap parcel fabric before you come in. And then finally, recognizing that a lot of times you'll come across invalid historic data inside the ArcMap parcel fabric. If I go and look at my historic layer, there's actually a definition query set there by default, and it basically says under historic parcels, and a historic parcel is created when you do a clip, when you go and sort of retire anything. It says, show me all the historic parcels for tax parcels, easements, and lots. Well, what happens with the other types? For example, if you were remapping your sections, townships, you would map certain things as historic and replace them. They'll never show up on this. Also, things like there's no subdivisions here. So you never really see your historic subdivisions, your historic sections, townships, quarter sections, special surveys. You don't see them, and you will wind up converting them over, and you'll wind up having entries that are not valid entries anymore. So again, doesn't mean that you can't do it, but you just want to know that there are things that you have to do. And with the ArcMap parcel fabric, there's issues. Again, get a good consultant to help you with this. All right, next, post-migration strategies. And I'm going to take this first one and say not post, but during migration strategies. The first one and the most important one, user training. You want to make sure that your editors, those people who are responsible for maintaining the parcel data, are well trained in Pro. The parcel fabric is a small part of it, is changes in the workflow, but you want to make sure that they're comfortable with Pro, because there are no real special tools inside of the ArcGIS parcel fabric like there were in ArcMap. Inside of the ArcGIS parcel fabric, you use standard ArcGIS editing tools, but they're smart enough to know whether you've got a parcel fabric or not, whether that parcel fabric is enabled, and whether or not you're working on an active record. So get your people to know and understand Pro tools, the editing tools. Make sure you know how to go and move around inside of Pro. Make sure you know how to use the Traverse tool, the edit tool, update COGO tool, all of those tools. Make sure that they're learn this and know this to make sure that they are successful. And again, it's not just post, you can do it during. You can have them begin to start training it, but you want to give them training. You don't want to just drop Pro on their desk and say, here it is. And then secondly, and this is where another thing, start looking at performance monitoring. How quickly do you get your parcels maintained with your current structures? How much work does it take a mapper to go and do this, especially if you've got annotation? With the data structures that you have right now, the data models, how long do you do? I can tell you that our experience from our clients that we've migrated into the parcel fabric, they are telling us back that they are doing all of the maintenance in half the time that they used to do it in. And it winds up giving them more information. So you just want to make sure that you have good metrics and you can look at what's going on there. And the reason why you want the metrics is you can then evaluate, well, maybe my migration strategy was to not move my anno. Well, what happens if you do move the anno? How much different is the actual daily maintenance routines that they have to go through? Again, it's about understanding what you're doing with your data. You are becoming curators of digital data instead of cartographers. And then identification. And originally this was identification and performance monitoring, and I decided to move it up. No, performance monitoring is important. You want to do identification monitoring and say, is everything getting attributed correctly? And that goes along with data validation. Is this data that we're migrating, not that we're migrating, but once we migrate it in, is this being done as efficiently as possible? And that then leads to creation of attribute rules. Attribute rules, there's three types of attribute rules. There's a calculation attribute rule. Do you have something that has to be calculated? Let the software do it for you. Don't make the editor go and do that. Whether it's the actual area that's included in there, the area that results, or whether you've got special formatting. We've got some of our clients that have 4 and 5 different ways that they go and format their parcel identifier using for these different systems that are out there. Let the attribute rules take care of that for you. If you have to have it with dashes, make an attribute rule to put dashes in. If you want to take them out and replace them with something else, put an attribute rule to do that, so that your mapper only inputs the data one time, and then it gets validated and properly configured. And then finally, make sure that you configure your project files. If you bring a standard parcel fabric in, it really doesn't configure any of your project files, doesn't go and tell you whether or not you're dealing with feet or meters or anything else. It just gives you default. It doesn't go in sequence. It doesn't highlight anything in here. Let me go and see if I can show you here. If I go to my tax parcels and open this up. Now this is a structure that's fully formatted, and it will go in and provide highlighting for everything that is needed. Calculated areas in acres, the shape area in square feet, the start dates formatted to only show you the date and not the time. All of this you want to go and configure, and then not have to deal with all the other attribution that comes along with it. But you want to make sure that you have it fully configured, fully attributed. Things like your line feature classes, make sure they're configured to go and real quickly be able to show you what you have to pay attention to and what you don't have to pay attention to. All right, you want to go and configure this. Moving into the parcel fabric is really an opportunity to reevaluate what's being done, how it's being done, why it's being done, and be able to go and justify it and say, there's better ways to go and do this. Let's see if we can help you with that. All right. So one last slide. I don't see any questions in the chat window. I'll give you an opportunity. Does anybody have any real quick questions in here? No. If not, I'm going to go and close this out, the recording, and
Oh, wait.
thank you.
We have one question coming in from Heather.
All right.
It says, yes, 1 sec. Give it a moment.
By the way, this is a fully configured one. About modifying the default build numbers. Heather, let's take that offline. All right. Let's take that offline. I'm going to stop the recording here.